North Carolinians Joe and Terry Graedon are world famous through their famous radio program, their newspaper column, their numerous books in which they've given us mostly reassuring information about our health. Now in a new book, they give us a warning. The new book has a very alarming title, Top Screw-Ups Doctors Make and How to Avoid Them. We'll ask Terry and Joe Graedon about these mistakes and what we should do about them, and about the title of their new book. All that on North Carolina Bookwatch next.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin, and my guests are Terry and Joe Graedon, the authors of Top Screw-Ups Doctors Make and How to Avoid Them. Gosh, welcome. Welcome back to North Carolina Bookwatch and UNC TV.
Nice to be with you, D.G.
Well, it's great. Well, you know, you all are so wonderful because usually the kinds of advice that you give and the information you bring is it does alert us, but it's reassuring, it's warm, it's here. Do this and you may feel better. It won't hurt to try it. And now, this alarming title, Top Screw-Ups Doctors Make and How to Avoid Them. Have you all changed?
No.
No, we have not changed. This has actually been an undercurrent of our writing for decades now.
Well, if you go back and look at the very first People's Pharmacy, 1976, so over 35 years ago, you will discover that there was a chapter in that book about deadly drug interactions and about some of the potential harms that can occur when you take medications. Now, we also had a chapter on home remedies, and I think a lot of people think about us when they think about the People's Pharmacy. They think about soap under the bottom sheet for leg cramps, or Vicks Vapor Rub for
almost anything.
Yeah, just about anything that ails you, including dandruff. So when we come out with a book that's alerting them to the dangers in the healthcare system today, they may go, whoa, what are the Graedons up to? But what we discovered in this book in doing the research is that healthcare harm and medical mistakes are probably the third leading cause of death in America today, comparable in many ways to heart attacks and strokes, and nobody's paying attention.
Wow. Well, your focus in the title is on doctors, and do you think that the relationship between patients and doctors needs to be adjusted in order to avoid the mistakes that the doctor is making?
Yes. We think that the relationship between doctors and patients should become much more collaborative. That would really help the doctors as well as the patients.
You know, I think right now there is an imbalance. I mean, doctors kind of run almost everything. They're in charge of the hospitals and the way things are done in hospitals most of the time. They're in charge of the clinics. They write the prescriptions. The pharmacists dispense those drugs. And what we are asking for in this book is a movement, and it's already begun, called Participatory Medicine, where the playing field is much more level, where there is a real partnership. Patients, physicians, nurses, pharmacists, all healthcare providers working together as a team to try and reduce all of these medical errors that are killing so many people unnecessarily.
DG, healthcare is so complicated that really doctors can't do it all themselves. They really need the help.
Well, so that the mistakes that are screw-ups, as you all describe them, that doctors make are a function of this more and more complicated, sophisticated medical system that we have that we benefit by largely because there are all kinds of new treatments and new drugs that can make life better for us, but it's complicated for a doctor to know when to apply them.
Well, that's part of it. Another part of it is the way in which our healthcare system is now set up so that doctors have less and less time to spend with a patient.
We hear from physicians all the time who say, I feel like I'm practicing assembly line medicine. I don't have enough time with people. And when doctors don't have enough time to listen to what the patient has to say, to describe their story in detail, to fill out all of the symptoms so that the doctor can then make the proper diagnosis and lead to the appropriate treatment, and then warn patients about side effects and check for drug interactions, without that time, these mistakes will happen and people will die.
And without that time and that type of collaborative relationship, doctors end up feeling very discouraged because they say, well, my patients aren't doing what they should be doing. I told them to take their medicine. I told them to lose weight or get more exercise, and they're not doing it. And of course, it's very hard to just take a statement like, DG, you really should lose weight, and do anything with that.
Right. Well, in your book, you have top 10 list all the way through it, and I think that your top of the list is that doctors are not listening to patients, and a lot of the mistakes are driven by that first mistake.
Right. There have been studies, many studies actually, over the years that have shown that physicians often interrupt a patient within about 20 seconds of their beginning to tell their story. When that happens, people don't get out all of the details, and as a result, that can lead, as we said, to misdiagnosis, and about 100,000 people die every year in this country from misdiagnosis in hospitals. That doesn't count nursing homes, and it doesn't count outpatient settings. So that's a huge number of people who are being misdiagnosed, and if you're misdiagnosed, again, as we said, you're going to get the wrong treatment. In addition, a lot of times the physician doesn't have enough time to tell the patient about the side effects, and some of these side effects can often be quite disturbing, if not life-threatening. Now, the side effect would be like an ACE inhibitor cough, like lisinopril, one of the most commonly prescribed drugs in this country, causes a cough. Now, you could say, well, a cough, no big deal. But for some people, it keeps them up at night. They may throw up because of the cough. They may even have accidents in their pants, urination, very embarrassing because of a very powerful cough. And if the doctor doesn't tell you ahead of time, this medicine can cause a cough, or when you come back and you report that side effect, well, we're going to move on to a different drug. If there isn't enough time, that can lead to all sorts of serious problems. We talk in the book about my mother's death, and that happened as a result of a drug interaction. And what we have learned in doing the research is that physicians often don't have time to check on all of the medicines you're taking to see if there's incompatibility, and pharmacists may not be able to always check, or they may override what we call the alerts that happen on the computer. There's even a name for that.
It's called alert fatigue because it's sort of like the cry wolf syndrome. Every time the doctor writes an electronic prescription, the alert pops up and says, oh, this patient is taking something that doesn't go with that drug, doctor. And if it happens often enough, doctors eventually say, well, I don't need to pay attention to that.
Well, this is real interesting to me because this is where you would go with this drug interaction problem that you all, as you pointed out earlier, have been worried about from the very beginning, that two very good, helpful drugs applied individually are great. When they are together, they can be killers. And so you rely on your physician and your pharmacist to understand that. But there are hundreds of thousands of drugs and nobody could know all of it. So you say, get a computer. Well, and that's not the magic answer.
It's not the magic answer because people are, people have to get through the day somehow. They have to get through that 7-minute time period that they've got with you, and they have to do it in a timely fashion. So there's not really enough time for the doctor to stop and say, well, is this interaction really important or is it not so important?
Well, what we really worry about, and we have a whole chapter, and it's a little crude, and I apologize for this. We talk about the screwing of senior citizens. And what do we mean by that? Well, a lot of physicians don't even know that there's a long list of medicines that should never be prescribed to an older person. Just absolutely verboten. But there's another list of drugs, we call them anticholinergic drugs, that can scramble your brain, make it hard for you to think clearly, can cause memory loss, can just make it hard to just make decisions in your daily life. And when you add up not just one, but maybe 4 or 5 or 6 of these anticholinergic drugs together, it can lead to devastating consequences. An older person might be diagnosed with dementia, for example, but it could be caused by the medicine. What are we talking about? Over-the-counter drugs that have something called DPH, or diphenhydramine. Now you might go, diphenhydramine? What's he talking about? Tylenol PM? The PM in those nighttime cold medicines. But then there are diuretics that people take, very commonly, prescribed diuretics. Drugs for heartburn that you can buy over the counter, like cimetidine, known by the brand name Tagamet, has some anticholinergic activity. Heart medicine has anticholinergic activity. The overactive bladder drugs also can cause this effect. And so you put all of these drugs together for an older person, and they can be cognitively impaired.
Well, Terry and Joe, this is scary stuff, and it leads me to say, well, wait a minute. The way you all are talking, it's not just drug interactions, but it's every drug has got a set of consequences. And in your book, you talk, one of the villains is statin drugs. And you say it's a mistake for a doctor sometimes to prescribe a statin drug for somebody who's got an elevated cholesterol?
Sometimes it is. And the reason is that the statin drugs have not been shown to prevent a heart attack in an otherwise healthy person who simply has an elevated cholesterol. Now, a person who has heart disease needs to be on a statin. A person who may have several risk factors for heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, perhaps may need to be on a statin. But someone who's otherwise healthy, the research does not show that that person will get any benefit. However, we do know that some of those people, not even a majority perhaps, but some of them are going to have side effects.
Well, and there's another point about statins and cholesterol. We talk a lot in this book about not treating numbers, treating people. And a lot of times I think we get caught up in the numbers game. So your cholesterol is 240 and you're 78 years old, and the doctor says, well, we got to get that cholesterol down. And then the person experiences side effects like muscle fatigue and weakness and perhaps some memory loss. Maybe the joints start to hurt. And the doctor says, well, you're just getting older, so sorry, that's a result of too many birthdays.
Or perhaps the doctor will prescribe something else to help with the side effects. Maybe you get Celebrex to help with that joint pain.
And that's got a whole set of side effects. And then so you have to take some medicine to prevent the upset stomach and the ulcers that might be caused by the Celebrex. But here's the point. If this is a 78-year-old woman who's going to church, who's involved in her community, who's exercising every day, and then is taking a medicine to lower her numbers, and she can no longer do all of those critical things for her health, you haven't accomplished very much.
That's a screw up.
That's a screw up. Absolute screw up.
Well, let's talk. We could talk about these drugs for a long time in your book. Even with a calm title would be scary about those kinds of things. But some of the mistakes that you point out relate to specific conditions or diseases that many of us encounter, and doctors sometimes might not do the right thing with respect to them. And you've got a whole list of them, like arthritis. What are the mistakes or the screw ups that doctors make in treating arthritis?
Well, one of the biggest problems with arthritis, the medicines that we have available to us are not benign. So the number one category are called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, and you can buy them over the counter as ibuprofen and naproxen, and doctors have their own set, like diclofenac, that they can write a prescription for, and they're powerful drugs. And they can relieve your joint pain. But not only can they put a hole in your stomach and cause an ulcer, but they may also increase your risk for a heart attack or a stroke. So they have to be used very, very cautiously, especially in older people.
So the right decision might be for the doctor to say you're just going to have to live with this?
Perhaps, but more more likely it would be a wonderful thing for the doctor to say there are a few non-drug things that you can do to help with your arthritis pain, to help control it, to help you live with it better.
And that may involve exercise, it may involve food as medicine because there are anti-inflammatory foods that might be beneficial. It might even involve a home remedy.
Joe keeps wiggling his fingers around.
He's suffering.
It turns out, if you have arthritis in your hands, one of the things that can be very helpful is to use a warm paraffin bath a couple times a day for your fingers.
Right. So, but that's just one
Now,
example.
is that what you're doing? I mean, is that what you're doing?
Well,
And
I
are you
mean,
taking some medicines for it too?
I actually use a lot of the home remedies that we talk about. I happen to be very fond of fish oil and turmeric, which is the yellow spice and yellow mustard, and I have pretty good flexibility.
Well, you all talk about those, and I don't want to get into your business, but like on turmeric, I mean, some of these non-prescription remedies have consequences as well.
They
You're
do.
so right.
And for example, we always tell people if they're taking turmeric and they're also on a blood thinner called warfarin or Coumadin, that might be a very bad interaction.
We actually suggest people on Coumadin not take turmeric.
Because it could
of
thin the blood too much.
interaction. So you got to be careful every way. The other common across our community condition is depression. And
Right.
are there different kinds of depression and different suggestions that doctors should give their patients for in different situations?
What we discovered to our astonishment, actually, as we did the research for this book, was that there is no FDA-approved indication for mild to moderate depression with all of these antidepressants. You've heard of them, I'm sure. Drugs like Prozac and Zoloft or sertraline, as a for example, or Lexapro or Pristiq. These drugs have not been approved for mild to moderate depression, for which they are mostly prescribed.
Well, now, Joe, I've heard of these, and I've heard some people say we ought to put them in the water because they're so good for everybody.
Well,
and
unless you look at the research.
Well, the research doesn't show that they really help mild to moderate depression better than a placebo would.
But they do have side effects.
It does show that they can help what the FDA terms major depressive disorder. So that's what FDA has approved them for. And they do, as Joe said, have side effects. Sometimes the side effects can be quite disabling, but the other problem with these medications is that they're very hard to stop. And some people develop really awful side effects when they try to cut back.
well, then, is it a screw up for a general practitioner to prescribe one of these antidepressant drugs to someone with moderate depression? Is that one of these top screw ups?
It's right on the edge. There are people who benefit, and we recognize that, and for them it's a miracle. But the vast majority, based on the clinical trials that have been done, the good studies show that they're no better than
Joe,
Tic Tacs.
this is unfair, isn't it? Because the doctor, it's an art rather than a science, and a doctor is looking at one patient, knowing that he or she might benefit greatly, not knowing whether the patient might be one of these people who's not going to benefit at all, and there's no magic way to tell
You're
other
so
than sensing it. So is it unfair to call that a screw up?
There is no magic way. So what we would say is these drugs can be used to be helpful, but you have to be very, very careful. And sometimes the prescribers are just not as careful, and they're not all doctors.
Well, I mean,
They're just not as careful as they should be.
I mean, here's the sort of bottom line on antidepressants. 160 million prescriptions were filled recently, last year, for this category of drugs. Doctors will tell you that we practice evidence-based medicine. The evidence is not there for the majority, at least 70% of those prescriptions, to work. So a doctor who prescribes one of the medicines we're talking about needs to be exceptionally vigilant to make sure that it is really going to work for you and it's not going to cause you side effects. And if it's not working, time to move on to something else, whether it's therapy, whether it's exercise, whether it's some kind of support network, because these drugs just don't have the evidence in treating mild to moderate depression for most people.
Well, you've got a whole list of other conditions that I would love to talk about, but I'd like to shift gears now and talk about you guys. And you know, it's unusual for a a married couple to have as close a working partnership. I mean, you all are together. Are you together 24 hours a day, and do you have
well,
this
pretty
banter
close.
going on all the time?
Yes, most of the time. We'll get in the car to go someplace, and we'll start talking about some of these ideas.
You know, Terry's a black belt in karate. And
Oh, I didn't know that.
So she has her time to go off, and I like to play tennis. So those are our times apart when we're doing those
Well, you have to
kinds
be
of
very
things.
careful about getting on the other side of her in an argument. don't you?
I'm very cautious.
He's good.
But Terry she's a quiet giant. That is to say, she doesn't exercise her skills in a threatening way to me or to anybody else. It's really there as a self-defense tool. But the point is, yes, we do spend virtually 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, whether we're having fun together or traveling, or whether we're working together on the newspaper column or the books or the radio show. We just love being together.
Well,
41 years.
Has it always been this way from the very beginning?
Not quite from the very beginning. At first, I had an anthropology career for a couple years, and it took a little while before we learned actually how to work together, how to write together smoothly, because we needed to figure out how to do it without getting our egos involved. If you've got your ego involved in a collaboration, especially a writing collaboration, things are going to be difficult.
Well, that leads right to my next question, or the next thing I'm interested in, that is, how do you write? And I guess before we talk about books, let's talk about newspaper column. I mean, this is several times a week.
Yes,
You're
we
doing
write
this-
3 a week.
And are you just you two?
Yes.
Is it just no big staff doing all
No,
this?
no big staff.
How does it work? How do you do this?
Well, we sit down together and we look over the vast supply of questions that we have received through email,
Let me
through
just
the
interrupt you,
website.
because people ask me all the time about writing, and I have this notion that if people would just answer questions, it's easier to answer a question than it is to come up with a question and answer it. Does that help you, or is it a hindrance in getting your message across?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't think there's a straightforward answer
Well,
to it.
initially, when King Features, which syndicates our newspaper column, said, well, yes, we'll publish your editorial column, but you're going to have to give us Q&As, questions and answers. And I thought, oh, that's crazy. I don't want to do that, because you can only write this many words in the answer, and I like to write this many.
That's true.
I mean, blah, 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 blah. But learning how to write tight is indeed an art form. And now we like to do it, and we do it together. We sit at one computer, and we trade seats back and forth.
Oh, come on. So you'll write a draft, or write a little bit of it, and then you write the next part, shifting back and forth.
Yes.
Giving
Never
ideas
heard of writers doing this.
back
Well,
and forth.
It's always good to have an opportunity to stand up and stretch your legs. So trading seats does that for us.
And do you have a regular time when you do this, do you do one column, finish it up, send it on, or do you do several?
No, we do them usually serially, one at a time.
How far in advance do you have to get them into?
We're always on deadline.
Yeah, the embargo date is 10 days after the day that we have to turn them in.
Basically, we start on Thursday and we finish by Friday morning, and we've been doing that now for
Much too long.
more than 30 years.
Is it fun, or is it, and is it?
it is fun.
It's
Is
fun.
it fun?
Most
And
of
is
the
it
time it's
profitable?
fun.
Do you make a little bit of money?
little bit.
It's a little bit.
A little bit.
I think a lot of people think that we're bringing in a lot of bucks. The reality is that we make a little bit from the radio, make a very little bit from the newspaper column, we make a little bit from the books. It's not a lot, but it's enough to pay the bills.
Wow. Well, let's talk. We just got a minute or two left, but let's talk about the book. And how is writing this book, or the earlier editions, particularly the People's Pharmacy, which is the classic, how do you write the books, and how is it different from how you approach the writing of the newspaper column?
Well, in writing the book, sometimes we will, in fact, one of us will go off at our own computer and sit down and write a first draft of this section, this chapter, and then the other one will review and revise it.
A lot of what we do is brainstorming back and forth. So at that point, we're sitting at the computer, but then we'll oftentimes, in a book like this, Terry will write one section, I'll write another section, then we'll trade and back and forth and edit each other. So there's an awful lot of cross-pollination no matter what we do.
Well, another thing that interests me about your books is that these are not just straight narratives. You break them up with little parts of the page which are in a shaded print, so that's special design. And then you've got checklists throughout,
And
references
stories.
and stories. What is your philosophy about writing, and what are your in terms of advice for other people?
Well,
who would like to write?
especially stories, because I think doctors sometimes look down their noses at anecdotes, but the way doctors learn is through case reports, and that's the way we learn. The Bible is full of stories, and that's what we tried to do in this book, is to make it come alive so people will understand how to protect themselves from medical mistakes.
Wow. Well, all of this is such great advice, both in terms of the medical advice and cautions that you give us, and I particularly appreciate and respect your willingness to teach some of us other aspiring writers some of the tricks of the trade. Congratulations on your new book, and thanks for sharing it with us.
Thank you, DG.
You're welcome, DG.
Our guests have been Terry and Joe Graedon, who are the authors of Top Screw-Ups Doctors Make and How to Avoid Them. Thanks to them for sharing that wisdom with us. Thanks to all y'all for listening. We'll be right back here next week to introduce you to another one of North Carolina's great authors.
Funding for North Carolina Bookwatch is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC TV, and by the North Carolina Humanities Council.